It's actually a superpower to have strong, important disagreements and biases and differences. If you've got some shared values, a shared mission, I think where that becomes incredibly challenging is when you don't have those shared foundational values or shared mission. Because in order to have that really healthy conflict, which is what I call it, just like being able to sort of call things out, disagree, question things, be sort of rigorous with your sort of improvement iteration, there needs to be an enormous amount of trust, right? And rapport. And a lot of that is based off of shared values and sort of history and like having a shared mission, right? In terms of you guys are both oriented in the same direction. These things are all nuanced, right? And so I think that sometimes we get stuck in this or that, black and white. This is good, this is bad, remote versus office. The truth is it's all super nuanced, right? In terms of collaboration, in terms of the way forward. And that's what I love, having these deeper sort of conversations, because I think you get to truths that are well defined and easier to apply in useful ways within your life and definitely as a designer.
In this conversation, the discussion is between me and Sharif Matar, who is a design director at Product Inc., where he explores the evolution of global product design and hiring talent from all around the world. The conversation delves into advantages and challenges of remote work. Sharif also stresses the importance of diversity in ideas and teams and the role of technology in unlocking human potential. Sharif shares his unique journey from discovering computers and overcoming dyslexia to his current role in building and managing a global design agency. Without further ado, let's welcome Sharif onto the show. Welcome to The Way of Product. I'm your host, Caden Damiano, and this podcast is for product professionals who eventually want to run their own product org one day. The average tenure of a product leader is 2 years. 2 years because they fail to make an impact with their teams. I want to figure out how the best product teams and creative technologists tick, with the goal of putting it all into a book. And I want to document the progress and behind the scenes with you as I write it in the coming years. Do you want to get the book for free? Then jump over to wayofproduct.com, subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll send you a draft of the book's introduction in a public Google Doc. So if you've benefited from this show in any way, if you enjoy your work more, you got unblocked from limiting belief, go to wayofproduct.com, show some love, and join the newsletter crew. I appreciate it, and I promise to continue to make the show and newsletter more and more valuable as the years go on. Now, let's get back to the good stuff. Thanks for hanging out. Hi, listeners. I am talking with a longtime listener and then also longtime phone tag of scheduling an interview, Sharif Matar. Sharif is a design director at Product Inc., which is a global product design agency, which has employees all over the world. Sharif, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, it's awesome to be here.
And before we get started, Sharif, can you just briefly introduce yourself to the listener, kind of tell them how you got to where you are, why you do what you do, and then we can get started.
Totally. I've been a designer for a long time, and the past few years, I've been building an agency and traveling the world and trying to balance the remote thing even before the pandemic. And my background is somewhat interesting. I grew up in Hawaii, and I went to a really artsy school, and one of the things that they believed in was no technology, which was interesting. And I had dyslexia, and so I struggled actually with learning. And one of the things that really kind of unlocked my curiosity and my passion for creativity was I ended up finding a computer in like a library in like another school. And I started playing sort of games, and I started learning typing and different things. And through that, I was able to learn in that environment sort of through self-learning far more better than the sort of a school environment. And ever since then, I've really deeply sort of understood this way in which technology is a fundamentally way to unlock people's potential and connect ideas that are seemingly disconnected, especially given so much of our knowledge and experience and our biases and our culture has been location sort of locked. And obviously the internet, but even just computers in general was a way of connecting nodes, and then seemingly geographically distant nodes. And so just the way in which I was able to learn and the passion that gave, ever since I've sort of been on this sort of journey of learning about technology, building technology and growing, starting off kind of in marketing, but then eventually sort of landing in visual design, storytelling, and filmmaking as well. And then finally, just a lot of what makes technology great, which is like UX and product design.
Yeah, that's such an awesome story, and it sounds very similar to mine. Like I loved filmmaking in high school, loved the craft of making something that resonates with people, and
Yeah.
then I recently did a personal offsite where I just did a forced solitude trip and listened to a bunch of books. I revisited one of my favorite books, Start with Why, and then I read Find Your Why, which is like the workshops to kind of help you discover like what your why is. And for me, like my why is when I interact with people, like my interaction with them indirectly or directly resonates with them, right? Because I want to make people feel like their needs are being met. And I think what better way to meet someone's needs at scale than designing a product that actually fulfills their jobs to be done, makes their work, their experience of doing a task easier or more, or making it more accessible by cheapening the cost to produce it or service it. Totally agree. And my first question is, what is you've mentioned that how technology unleashes our potential. And I think just recently, there's kind of like this new revolution of like technology that is essentially making the world smaller. You're in Amsterdam, I'm in Utah making this call. And I don't think pre-COVID, I don't think the video chat technology was reliable enough to do this. And so the world's definitely smaller. What is kind of your perspective on global companies and remote work now that technology is actually allowing us to express ourselves pretty limitlessly, like agnostic of location?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of been the potential of it has been around for a long time. And I guess the sort of the front lines of that for a long time now has been sort of like digital nomads or people that are sort of pushing the bounds of remote. And you have these sort of early adopters. But the dream, I think, early on, once you started to really collaborate and the majority of your work started happening on computers and software and collaboration tools, this idea of really being able to sort of work across cities and with people, even just with people on different floors in the same building and different people working from home and with people in the office, people working between states, people working between countries. And this idea of, okay, what is the real value of an office place if the vast majority of our work is being taken place and productive time is spent on a computer? And then just the speed of sort of mode switching and conversation switching and sourcing diverse and different ideas, that becomes exponential when you collaborate virtually versus having to physically share space with people. And so I think the potential of that always has been compelling. But to your point, the technology hasn't really been there. And I think people are, with their ideas and then the physical hardware and then the technology and the software and the tools end up needing to catch up. It's sort of like that sort of sci-fi phenomenon where you have a bunch of things watching in like cartoons and a Minority Report and all these like movies and stuff like that. And they sort of paint a picture and a vision, and art sort of is great at that. And then eventually sort of like the world starts to try and dream about these things and people start building those things. And eventually we get something like that and catching up. And I feel like there's a specific point that we're at. Obviously, COVID and the pandemic sort of pushed a bunch of people off the ledge, that were sort of standing on the ledge. But I feel like there was fundamentally a huge trial period in the test, and it sort of pushed things forward several years. And I think we're definitely at a point where we really need to start thinking about, okay, let's say if offices are somewhat outdated, right? And they're holding us back in certain different ways. It's not so much a conversation of comparing working together versus working from home or working virtually. It's more a matter of how do we do this well? Because I think it's sort of like it feels like a dumb conversation that's happening right now, which is, okay, there's a bunch of people arguing that working from home is terrible, and then a bunch of people arguing that remote is great. But the truth is, it's a much more nuanced conversation. I mean, fundamentally, if a company's not willing to do remote well, it's probably a really bad choice, right? Because the company and the organization and the hierarchy and the structure of how you collaborate isn't built around remote. And I think there are huge benefits to unlock with remote. But if the company is unwilling to make those changes and orient themselves around that, that's why the stats are so mixed. And there's cases on both sides of this. I think the truth is much more nuanced, and companies really need to embrace it in a sense that they need to reorganize and optimize for this new environment if they want to actually reap some of those benefits.
Yeah. And what would be like the biggest benefit of like fully embracing remote based off your experience running basically a physical location agnostic company?
I think it's like potential of like diverse teams. And I'm not talking about like diversity and this sort of cheesy sort of corporate speak. I'm talking about like literally just diverse ideas, opinions, culture, different perspectives. Experience, right?
Yeah.
So just getting people's experiences, which to me is the most important thing, is like getting their 2 cents, having people sort of with different perspectives, they see different things, different priorities, they have different environments. And then just being able to sort of like collaborate, discuss things, have healthy conflict. You're going to unearth those important questions. You're going to sort of wrestle with the most important things, and you're going to be able to sort of end up crafting a product that is going to be much more sort of palatable and exciting and interesting, and with a lot less sort of like holes and like missing pieces and things not thought of and perspectives like not voiced. So I think the agency, I'm working with people from Portugal to Boston, Canada and Australia, Ukraine, to pretty much all over the world. You're just like, who do I want to work with? Who has experience working on this? Where is this product really fundamentally going to serve in terms of which community, right? Can we tap people to collaborate with from that context? I mean, I think that is just such a massive leap forward in pushing and improving products.
Absolutely. In what I've noticed in my most recent gig is a company that is global as well, but it has like physical locations, and we have like little satellite offices to allow for like in-person collaboration. But I started my career in the tech scene in Utah, a lot of unicorns here. And
what are some of the top ones that people know about?
So Divvy was just acquired by Bill. So Bill.com has an office here. We have, I can't believe I forgot. I'm like spacing on the name. I was about to work there. I had an offer there. There's this mortgage company that was acquired by Encino, which is in North Carolina. I mean, basically any like successful company gets acquired by another company outside of Utah. It's called, my caffeine's still kicking in. You also have Adobe Analytics is developed here.
Awesome. Yeah.
We have Microsoft
satellite offices
and then there are a few exits. Cotopaxi is located here. So there's really Traeger Grills is based in Utah. So there's just a lot of like really a strong business scene. A lot of it has to do with like a really strong university environment. I guess if you look at anywhere that has like a strong economy, it's the inbound of new people.
I compare it to, because it's stunning. It's one of the most beautiful places in the US. I compare it, so there's a lot of outdoor related sites as well. I compare it to Colorado. I find it pretty similar. I used to live in Colorado and Boulder and what's happening in Denver and other parts. But just the vibe and the culture and the scene for tech, I think, is really interesting what's happening.
And I think the pandemic exacerbated that because a bunch of Californians just went to Colorado, Utah, raised the prices. And that's a different podcast, but still, and it's getting better, but it's very culturally homogenous. And so before COVID, I was like commuting to the office a couple jobs ago, and you could tell like the management team were all kind of stacked from like the same local grad school. Culturally similar values, and then also had similar beliefs about like work, that it's about shareholder value and not like building a team of people. And so that's why I totally disagree. I actually, I'll say I'll agree with you that it's more nuanced to say that, oh, because we're in the office, it's now, if leadership's not acting like leadership, it's not going to work no matter what. It really depends on the leader. But then I just started working for this company based out of LA, and they went like full global. We have like developers in Nigeria, we have offices in Mexico, and we're a global like produce tech company. So it's going to be all over the world. And I'm like, immediately see the difference. Like every one of my coworkers does not believe the same things I believe. And so like at that point, you're just like, okay, we have to find like a common goal that we all agree on.
Yeah.
Which is the cause of the company. But if we all believe the same thing, like we're not fully bought into the work. And so that's the biggest benefit I've seen of like working at a location agnostic company.
Yeah, totally. I think if you've got some shared values, a shared mission, it's actually a superpower to have strong, important disagreements and biases and differences.
Mm-hmm.
I think where that becomes incredibly challenging is when you don't have those shared foundational values or shared mission, because then it sort of, in order to have that really healthy conflict, which is what I call it, just like being able to sort of call things out, disagree, question things, be sort of rigorous with your sort of improvement iteration. There needs to be an enormous amount of trust, right? And rapport. And a lot of that is based off of shared values and sort of history and like having a shared mission, right? In terms of you guys are both oriented in the same direction. Yeah, totally. I totally hear what you're saying. And it's super valuable. Like these things are all nuanced, right? And so I think that sometimes we get stuck in this or that, black and white. This is good, this is bad, remote versus office. The truth is it's all super nuanced, right? In terms of collaboration, in terms of the way forward. And that's what I love, having these deeper sort of conversations, because I think you get to some sort of like truths that are well defined and easier to sort of apply in useful ways within your life and definitely as a designer.
Yeah. And I've just I've gotten to the point where you can't actually, no one has enough data to make it like a zero sum discussion. Like Airbnb is doing great being location agnostic. And they also have times like they believe more in like a hybrid model where, and I agree with this. I think that there is like a need for in-person time, but it's not to get the work done. It's to align on a strategic pivot or like a direction. And so get everyone in the same place to run a physical workshop and then do activities together as a team helps boost the serotonin and the camaraderie. But getting like, when it comes to actually like executing on the work, and once you have a strategy, you don't need to be in the same location. And that's like Brian Chesky's view. And also he like critiques a lot of like these bankers and CEOs and billionaires where they're like, oh, no, we need employees in the office. That's where the best work happens. And then he's like, yeah, but then you're spending the summer in the Hamptons. So it's kind of, yeah, we know where you are. And like when you're not in the office in the summer. And yeah, there's this level of like hypocrisy about wanting to control people. And that just tells me, I'm like, okay, I don't want to work for that guy. I don't want to work for that guy. There's both great examples on both sides of where it happens. But the common denominator is that there's a strong visionary leader that knows what they want. They've communicated their why to the company. They've acquired talent that align with that why. And I'm just basically copying like what Simon Sinek said. And then they also provide ways to boost serotonin, oxytocin, give the dopamine rush of going towards a worthy goal. That's the common denominator. And so my conclusion is I'm like, I'm not even going to participate in this argument because I don't care what you think. I like hybrid. I like mostly remote. And I'm going to business however I want. I've driven the business forward in both environments. And so I don't think it's that. I think we're focusing on the wrong problem.
So I completely agree. I completely agree. And I love what you said earlier too about just hiring. And like the data suggests the same thing. It's like there's that book, sort of The World is Flat. And the truth is the world isn't as flat as people think it is, right? Like that, the whole premise of that book was like the world is flatter than we think it is. But the truth is that most people still are networked with the people within their geographic environment. Most people work with people in their geographic environment. Most people have the views of the culture and the environment that they're in. Most people don't interact across state lines. Most people don't interact across countries. And businesses don't trade and interact as much as sort of the illusion that we do. Countries are much more isolated than I think is sort of we're led to believe by just like watching TV and stuff like that. But technology is one of those things that completely sort of breaks down these things in ways that is super efficient. But like hiring practices, like if you're actually trying to get perspectives and points of view outside of sort of whatever sort of bubbles that you're in, especially in the work environment, like it's something like it's more than 80%, 8 out of 10 hires are sort of like reference based, right? Whether it's like a recruiter or it's like you're just bringing someone in. And so these sort of like job listings where people apply, I mean, this is kind of a big scam, right? You're sort of like AI optimizing your resume and applying to like online jobs. And it just goes into a big black pit of like emptiness, right? And I feel like the majority of these companies just post their jobs just to have the illusion as if people can apply. And I think people are sort of like picking up on that. And I think people have a sense that this is like a messed up system. The truth is that most people that get in it, somehow it's recommended, right? Because trust is that missing piece, right? Have you worked with them? Can I collaborate with this person? Someone I trust is saying that this is a good hire, or having someone mutual. Most sales works that way and most hires work that way. And the good of that is that you can build relationships, and that becomes core and fundamental to your career, is building relationships. The hard part and the difficult part of that is you get, like you said, right? You get a bunch of people that are basically cultural or idea clones of whoever's in charge of hiring, right? Yeah. Either from like the executive team or like leadership or managers or recruiters. Is people think that they're sort of evidence-based or rigorous or data-based in terms of this is the best, this is the right fit. And the truth is, as humans and UX designers, we know this more than anyone, is we're super flawed, right? Our cognitive abilities, our abilities to think critically and reasonably and rationally, we're very much human. Like we're flawed and we have tons of biases, right? And so we think we're making some sort of rigorous, well-reasoned decision, including in hiring. And the truth is we're just sort of like emotionally reacting and responding to a bunch of complicated biases that it's almost impossible to fully unpack. And that ends up being the result. And so you have a bunch of sort of companies that are sort of locked into certain norms. And then I think big things get missed, right? When everyone sort of fits a certain mold. And that can work. That can work in certain contexts for different use cases. Again, we're not black and white, right? There's a lot of gray. There's a lot of use cases where that works well, but there's also a lot of areas in which the crowd think and sort of a bunch of people that are in agreement or have the same biases can really sort of walk themselves into a really difficult place or end up causing a lot of harm, right? In terms of the things that they're building together.
It causes harm to externally and internally, right? Layoffs because we're not critically thinking, and so we overhired. And so I just
think about what just happened with all the big tech companies, right?
Yeah, because
you had this massive sort of ramp up when there was easy money coming from the government and sort of like just flooding the system and assets with money, and then a ton of sort of money just got funneled to a bunch of sort of tech companies that were scaling because the economy was sort of superficially doing really well. And then salaries started getting inflated. And you just had companies that were hiring without a need because they were sort of just like in a frenzy. And they just sort of hired tons of people. And then the second that the economy sort of had a pullback and the stock market and like different things had a pullback, and then people all of a sudden went from this sort of like frenzy of hiring, and then they went to just matching each other, right? In terms of trying to fire a certain percentage of the workforce. And it just This isn't some sort of, wow, these wise sort of leaders are guiding us. It's like, it's a lot of very emotional decisions at different levels, chasing what's happening, and then people kind of looking at each other. And that's why you see a lot of similar behavior, especially at these big companies. And most recently, we're dealing with just like an enormous number of firings. I mean, I guess you could also, another way of looking at that is the workforce didn't really shrink that much if you actually compare it, because it grew so fast in such a short period of time. So I think the actual workforce at some of these big tech companies is like back down to 2019 levels, but which is not that much. But if you actually like the actual numbers and the percentages, is like they fired 10%, 15%, 20%, 25% of the workforce. This is significant numbers, right? This is huge.
Like 10,000 people in a day. Like,
Yeah.
and those people, they can't pay their rent. I mean, let's not feel too bad for them. They probably could live off their
The
massive
tech people
comps.
will be okay.
They'll be fine.
Yeah.
But the business, like I think the ripple effects, because these are like staples of our economy, the ripple effects to the people that can't afford to take a year off and travel and find themselves after being laid off from Meta. It's not the same. Yeah. And I've heard so many stories of like during COVID where they're just like, oh, I just decided to take the year off and stuff. And it's like such a privilege to be working in this industry. It doesn't matter how hard you've worked to get here. Everything is privilege. And no matter what, because there is always luck involved. And yeah, it's like and for me, I was having lunch with a friend and he's talking about his career and stuff. And he brings up the comment of, but I need to stay somewhere longer than he like hates his job. And he's like, I need to stay somewhere longer than 1 year. It looks bad on the resume. Sure. And I'm like, well, look at me. Like I've never stayed anywhere longer than 2 years. And I've only stayed at one company for 2 years. I've always been kind of moving every year, not on purpose. It just, that's a startup game. Like after a year, you kind of know, oh, this leadership team is not going to take us to the promised land and we got to go. Cause it is down to the executive team if like this company is going to succeed, because if they keep making bad decisions, it doesn't matter.
And if it is defined, is it the wrong one? Yeah.
And that's not common across most startups. And so I'm going to stay here for 4 years. And I'm like, you don't like it though. And I'm like, I move around. He's like, yeah, but you're always working with the same people over and over again. And I'm like, yeah, there's no rules. That's the strategy I chose. And I like doing it because I like working with people that I trust. Yeah. And it's people think that there's like this objective, logical answer. And I'm like, no, there's no rules on how to business. And we don't have to prescribe to like the zeitgeist that is really just led to these massive layoffs, hurting people's livelihoods, whiplashing the economy because we're doing growth at all costs. You don't think there's something wrong with that rhetoric? Like when looking at the fruits of that rhetoric, like just do you. And if you like doing remote, the technology is there to do it. Okay, we're going to take a quick break from our scheduled programming. If you're enjoying this podcast and you've gotten any value out of it so far, I have a special request for you. I'm currently writing a book on product team collaboration and I want to get the message out there. So if you want to take a moment and hit subscribe in your podcast app, that would mean the world to me and it would be super helpful in booking better guests, getting better content out there, and getting the message of this book out to more people. So whether you have to pause this podcast or you like multitasking while listening to it, just take a moment and hit subscribe on the show page and show your support. Again, thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
I feel like there's a huge harm, and it's common that people repeat sort of like convenient myths and like stories from like recruiters and businesses. And it's always from like their perspective. Like you have to stay at a company longer than a year, and you have to have multiple years at a company before you leave. You can't talk about salary because you want to keep that to yourself. And like all these different things that are sort of like common. It's just like people are regurgitating just like things that are just not true, or in fact, like from the company's perspective, in the company's best interest. It's like the truth is like most people that dramatically increase their salary are jumping around companies. Right? They move every so often, right? Every 2 years, every year, something like that. They're actually going to a different company and skipping a few levels. They're not sort of stuck in some sort of planned out ladder. And companies are desperately trying to keep people for longer periods of time. because the cost associated with recruiting is so high that you're so much better off sort of like training and upskilling existing people, especially if they have a proven track record. Because additionally, the cost of hiring someone and then seeing that it was a mistake, extremely high. So even if it's like a middle employee, you at least have a track record to know that they can produce, right? It's not, so it's, the risk is a lot less. And so you've got all these sort of myths and then people regurgitating them. And if you're actually coming from like a creative or like a contributor perspective, some of these things are totally contrarian and like different, and they benefit the person much more.
Yeah,
everything from negotiations to everything. Yeah,
gonna put a hold on that question then and keep this thread going. And I love how like they're actually not like working the problem or abstracting the problem of why people don't stay at a company very well. Like I recently just I re-listened to Leaders Eat Last, which I think is like a great primer. It's another Simon Sinek book. If a listener who hasn't found it, it's a
when
great.
You get him on the podcast, he's awesome. He's great.
I want big guests when I can handle the attention. So yeah. So it's like, what's the point of driving a bunch of attention to me if there's nothing to like, there's no community.
Yeah, I love that. You're sort of pushing through the crucible, right? And then you by the time you're hitting at like at this level, you'll sort of be tried and true, and you'll have the skills and capabilities that'll meet sort of your style expectations and the goals. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Like,
I guess when I don't know if maybe I said this before we started recording, but I do have the ambition to do a tour for the podcast, actually like fly out to the guests and interview them. Maybe that's when I'll just meet Simon where he is. And then, and because I think the hardest thing about building a community, and I'll tie this into like Leaders Eat Last, is that Simon's whole like thesis of what makes companies great. He like talks about Delta and how American Airlines went through like the 2008 crash, like the 2001 terrorist attacks, and how he basically breaks down like how do these really successful companies who take care of their people and have like great retention rates, what are they doing? And they're fostering the ability to build up, like to create bonds through oxytocin. They're not doing this intentionally, but the human brain's wired to be social and connection. And I think the experience of building that community is, if I need to be able to capture, because I want to actually build relationships from that much attention, right? And if I don't have the ability to build a relationship with someone, I think like there's so far, even at the scale that I'm choosing to run at, missed opportunities. I've known you for over a year on LinkedIn, and I didn't even know you're in Amsterdam, and I could have hit you up when I was in Amsterdam. But if I don't have the systems in place to actually capitalize on those opportunities of meeting these amazing people and be able to say, hey, I'm in town, do you want to grab like a coffee or something and then catch up? That's what I want to be able to execute on. And we talk about how, all these companies, they just talk, he breaks it down to, hey, the company, there's really like two beliefs of what business is for. Avoid working for companies or like starting companies that it's all about bringing shareholder value, because then you're just going to optimize for metrics in the short term to get a return for the shareholders, and you're not providing value to the customer or cause. And the other people believe that, hey, we're tribal creatures. We've been evolved biologically to be tribal creatures, and a company is meant to move a worthy cause forward, and making money is like part of staying in the game of business, but making sure that the people are taken care of and feel ready to express themselves, and they feel like they're fulfilled, that making sure that like they're feeling oxytocin, serotonin is how you retain people for a long time.
The hormone synapses of our brain, and we respond to those things, wanting to be liked and wanting to be loved and building relationships and sort of doing things that are irrational. And we're a deeply relationship-based creature. Our survival just in our DNA is from birth. I just had my firstborn child. And just when your baby is like not surrounded by someone or being held, I mean, they're crying for bloody murder, right? And like humans from birth, I mean, obviously that's like a biological like life feeding and love need. But even as adults, we're wired the same way. We need deep relationships, right? Because we're not a very impressive sort of species or animal as humans. We are literally entirely based off of, and it's not even intelligence. We think we're like so smart. It's literally our ability to communicate, right, through language and collaborate and then just produce enormous leverage. But it's always together. There's this amazing documentary, I think it's called Primates or something like that. And they just follow these different tribes of chimpanzees. And it's the largest chimpanzee community or civilization, you could call it. And it's just, you're just watching sort of like a soap opera of humans. I mean, they have these relationships, they break these relationships, they have competitions with other groups and large sort of groups. And then there's these sort of like in fighting and political sort of fighting and who's on top and who's leading and who's loyal and this and that. I mean, it's just wild. And so we're built the same way. And our strength is entirely based off our relationships, and our survival is based on that too. And if you can get people to feel connected and to lead people towards a sort of a mission and sort of shared values and a shared sort of like language, and get those sort of like hormones going that really bond people together, then you've got a really powerful company. I think where I disagree with that kind of a thing, and I think we've had sort of a bunch of experiments with this. There's been different sort of trends, whether it's what is the company's policy on racial discussions, or the environmental movement, or the hot topic, or gender discussions, and all these important, really deep and profound and important topics. But they're sort of brought up in a sort of unrelated to the industry, unrelated to the work. Obviously, these topics are related to everything in our lives, right, as humans. Mm-hmm. But they're not directly related to what the company's doing and what the company's producing and what the company's trying to do in the world. And you can expand out the mission of a company to include those things if you really wanted to, but it's not necessarily helping the people that it's saying it's helping. It's not sort of promoting the cause. It's mostly just some branch of the marketing department of some big company is trying to stay ahead or not be called out or have some sort of embarrassing PR thing, right? So then they release these sort of statements and companies and have all these employee walkouts. And I see companies that sort of avoided some of these sort of topics, and they just said, hey, we're a company focused on X, Y, and Z, or we're a company that's our mission is to produce this result. And we've got a bunch of driven people that are focused on that mission who have diverse, differing viewpoints politically on a whole host of issues in their personal lives. And actually, we want more people included in the conversation, and we want diverse people with diverse perspectives to all be able to talk and collaborate and share this mission. And to the extent, and Coinbase, the head of Coinbase, Brian, is a good example of this, where he said, hey, we're not going to participate in a lot of these sort of topics and we're going to just focus on what you mentioned, shareholder value. It's not necessarily that, but just focused on like being a profitable, sustainable company, doing the right thing, and just like keeping our heads down and doing the things that matter to improving our products and services and the customers that benefit from these things, instead of getting sort of distracted by a bunch of sort of PR virtue signaling topics.
Well, and Coinbase,
those companies have really also, I think, suffered as a result, and because of the distraction and the disagreement and the sort of like unnecessarily conflict that goes on in terms of what these topics are.
And even Coinbase has a pretty like specific why, where it's building out the infrastructure, or like the future, like what finance is going to look like in the years. And so they're like, how does me talking about this X cause help us build out the future of finance? Now, there is opportunities to consider that. It's okay, how do we make it so that there is no gatekeeping in the new future of finance? That's a great way to integrate like a word, like a tangential cause into your 100%. Cause. And I think what an insight I just had just with talking with you right now is that we're so concerned about people agreeing with us when we should just be like worrying about getting alignment. And those are two different things. Yes. Hey, do we want the same thing? We don't need to believe the same thing. We just need to want the same thing to work together. And then we work on towards that thing that we want. And then we don't need to believe the same things to push like a KPI in a business forward. Like that's because it's not about belief. It's about building things that and marketing things and getting things in front of people that like actually help them think less, save money, all that stuff. And there is no evidence, there's no objective truth that like there is one way to do it. So there's nothing to
100%.
believe in. The only thing to believe in is that, hey, if you want to get rich, you need to own something that's worth a lot. That's how you get rich. That's the first principle. There's no like path. There's no path to get there. You just need to own something, and then you need to make that thing valuable over time, and do it in a way that aligns with what you value, and hopefully you bring people along the way that will help you get there. That's how it is. But everyone's talking about, oh no, you need to create distance from the employees. Like you have to be like Queen Elizabeth when you're a VP, where you can't be seen having an opinion. But that's where I think you get the best work is, hey, if you don't agree with someone and you don't like how they work, just don't work with them. Everyone's critiquing how Airbnb works. And hey, if you want to go be mini CEO PM at Meta, go work for Meta. Like you don't have to make it like Airbnb doesn't like mini CEO PMs. Like they want storytelling PMs. If you don't like that, don't work for Airbnb, but don't put it on Airbnb to accommodate your belief system.
Yeah. Or so big insurance companies, banks, like the two biggest voices against sort of the remote thing are like JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon and like even Elon Musk, right? And they use a bunch of data, they use a bunch of information, but the truth is like for their businesses, that's true, right? Whether it's like an old 100-year-old outdated bank, and I can say that because I did work for them a long time ago.
Yeah, Sharif's 100 years old. He knows how old they are.
Yeah, it's just like way too big. I mean, it's bigger than most countries, right? Mm-hmm. Or is it just Elon Musk, who's super controversial and he's innovating on a bunch of different fronts? But the truth is, it's like for his business, it doesn't make sense to be remote because he's working on a bunch of hardware, whether it's cars or rockets or whatever he's working on. It's like,
it's just not. It doesn't make sense.
You can't do you can't do that. Most of that work,
And you don't have to work for Tesla. The people that work at Tesla on site, they believe in it. They believe enough to move away from their families and go on site. And you should admire that conviction. You shouldn't critique 100%. It because it's not remote. And also Elon Musk, the things he's trying to accomplish require sacrifice. Hey, but he gets results the way he works, and the people who work for him believe in what he believes in. So he's not exploiting labor by saying you have to be on site. Like he doesn't hire people that don't believe in the mission.
Everyone's choosing to be there, and everyone's choosing to take sacrifices to achieve unbelievable things and move industries forward. Totally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And you don't have to. Everyone people ask like they say, "Hey, you're going to work as harder than you've ever done before, and you're going to sacrifice and do all these things. And if not, then leave." And then you have all these think pieces about people saying, how dare you and whatever. It's not how dare you. Live your life and value the things that you value, right? Enjoy what you enjoy and understand that there are trade-offs. You cannot do these unbelievable, hard, difficult, extraordinary things and also not have huge sacrificing costs or trade-offs associated with that. It doesn't mean that you need to wear yourself down, but to some extent, there needs to be sort of a push and pull and trade-offs. I mean, I totally agree. And I think as long as you can be sort of transparent about your values and what you're driving towards and why you're doing it, and then people sort of opt into those things, I think that's totally fair. And you're totally right. Everyone wants, from the top down, businesses and everything, they want people and things to run the way that they would run them, to share their values with it. And that's not diversity at all, right? Diversity is like working with people that you disagree with on a bunch of things to achieve things together. And achieving them most effectively is going to involve different people with different ideas working together.
Yeah. You know what I think makes great products is a level of rigor where you don't get any like intellectual breaks. It's hard emotional work. And the only way you do that is you have to work with people that you don't have a cultural shorthand with. So if I came from the same background as a lot of my initial jobs before pre-COVID, we had a cultural shorthand. So we don't have to explain ourselves. We could use like the same mental models and analogies that make them understand it really quickly. Right. And then that ostracizes the minority person that is the diversity hire. But at Produce Pay, I don't have, most of the people I work with, I don't have a cultural shorthand. I have to articulate my ideas. I have to do the extra work to write down why I think I should do something, because there's no way that I could just say, oh, jargon. Oh yeah, jargon. Yeah, of course.
Totally. And the jargon also is a part of that, right? It's like the alphabet soup that companies, especially in finance, but across the board, if you let enough similar people in a room long enough, like they're going to find ways to just abbreviate words and terms and things for no reason. Yeah. And it's like, it gets in the way of efficiency. And it's just like, explain things simply, right? Make the case, build your storytelling capabilities, encourage disagreement, have people make the case. Like if everyone's agreeing on stuff like that, you sort of don't have that muscle anymore, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not about like, I like what you said earlier about like this idea of people are more interested in being sort of right than they are about being right. And what I mean by that is you're willing to be wrong about something just so that you can sort of appear as the winner or like you won or are right. But to be accurate is better, right? And that we should be encouraged over somehow appearing like you made the right call, or that your initial idea or proposal was like perfect, or that you were even correct in some of the assumptions you made, right? So like encouraging people to acknowledge that they're wrong about stuff is like the fastest way to get your overall organization to be actually right about things, more things. And it's just disagreeing. And that can happen obviously between departments, where designers talking to engineers, and those cultural differences like clashing, PMs in a lot of companies. I've worked at NBC Universal, which is a massive company. It worked with a ton of Fortune 500 companies, and I've worked with a bunch of startups, especially the larger organizations. They try and start segregating different departments, and so then there's a bunch of gatekeepers between departments, even within companies. And what you're doing is you're just like lessening disagreement so that you can have sort of like this illusion of harmony. And then you have sort of
and efficiency
problem that exists there.
Yeah. And there's no evidence that you're actually solving any problems, because you're not thinking in problems anymore. You're just thinking in like efficiencies. Like it's a
problem solving is messy. It's what about this? What about that? Disagree with this. How do we get this? Test this. How do we see the results? What can we put this in the hands of users? Did you miss this part? So it's so messy. And if you're frustrated, like the way you know you're working on interesting, powerful stuff as a designer is if you feel like totally overwhelmed and frustrated and like you're like detail, swear word. If you're just like focused on these like really small sort of like things and just like wrestling with things and like having trade-offs and like feeling lost and feeling like you're never going to come anywhere at the end of this, and having like hard disagreements where you have to sort of still build trust. I mean, that's so messy, and it feels like there's no way that's sustainable or right. And that's usually a sign that you're working on something like important, and you're probably solving some important problems. Because if you're not solving problems, then someone's going to have to deal with those problems, and it's usually going to end up being the end user, right? And most cases, especially software versus physical things need to work like bridges. But software is like bits and bytes. There's actually so much more room for people's biases and opinions to get things wrong. And so 70 to 80% or more of software fail. And it's for all those reasons and others.
Yeah. They think that it existing is the value add when it actually delivering on the promises of the value proposition is the value add. Like that there's like this social contract being met when we advertise something and it actually does the thing. Alex Hormozi talks about this all the time in his podcast. He's like, no, like you're successful when you delivered on the promise, and even better, over delivered. And if you don't do that, if the point of doing business is just to build functional useless artifacts, just don't work for those companies. And then,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
The world is not a museum of like your visual creative ideas that you were right about, right?
I got paid to do this.
Yeah.
I didn't make any money,
no,
but I got paid.
What impact did you have? What results did you have?
Yes.
How did you change it and respond to the real need and the real problems that are being solved? It's design is an art and a science, but it's the science part of it needs to work, right? It's not just a think piece for you to be whimsical and show your stuff in a movie theater or in a museum. It's not that personal, right? It has to collaborate, it has to work, it has to solve something.
The one truth that I learned is that if you don't work, the problem will work you. And what the problem working you looks like: frustration, silos, lack of critical thinking, nepotism, all that stuff. Okay, the problem's just going to kick your butt if you're not going to work the problem and be proactive. Like, you're going to just pay the price. And then you do pass the cost on to the end user if you don't do it as well. So then the problem continues to work on the customer. Sharif, we are coming up on time. I just wanted to respect your time. Is there anything in this conversation? I could keep going for hours, but I'm trying to keep this into an hour. Is there any loose ends that you feel haven't been said in this conversation that need to be said before we wrap up?
Maybe sort of like designers' side hustles, or like design leading companies, and the potential or the positives of that kind of a thing.
Yeah, you know what? That's a great way to wrap up, because as soon as I saw Brian Chesky explain his operating model that's led to a huge cash flow positive business.
Yeah.
And it breaks a lot of the conventions. He just chose to design his own business model, like his own business operations. I'm going to choose how Airbnb operates. I'm going to use my designer hat and organize the business around the problem, the cause we're trying to solve. Brian Chesky is probably the closest thing to Steve Jobs since Steve Jobs, in my opinion. Right. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I don't have to believe anything that I don't agree with. It's like the designing of the business, and who's better equipped to do that than someone that understands design thinking and like abstracting problems. I mean, I would say like the best companies that we have today they were former engineers or designers. Who's the richest guy in Great Britain? It's James Dyson. Everyone talks about Richard Branson. James Dyson, a product designer, is the richest guy in Britain. And yeah, like that's the way I see it. The design of business is like the next frontier. And I think that's why product designers are going to be like the next business leaders, because we're starting to learn, this book said that, but I don't feel like that applies with what we're trying to do in this business.
I love that. And it's a great example of that is you talked about Columbus, people talk about Tesla and the innovator, and this, like, he was fighting Edison. The truth, like, the reason Edison is so famous is because he was a brilliant sort of marketer and business designer. Like, he was just like, everything were sound bites, marketing, his ideas, and he was competing. So like, I think designers, for better or worse, like, it's not the best technology or the best thing that wins. It's the best. It's how well does this sort of like message meet, and like the product meet the needs of that day. And he was able to win out. And so the more you can have designers in leadership, and the more you can have, I think it has two really important positives. Mm-hmm. Number one, designers typically are not great at business. And replace the word business with sustainability. Is this going to be around? Can you make sales? Can you run a company that actually hires people and does stuff for an extended period of time? So sustainability is a better word than business, right? So designers are not that good because they take big risks, and they sort of like value research and development and like refinement and this art science balance. And the rubber's not hitting the road in important ways. And so by having designers at that level, you force them to make those considerations. Like you said, Brian Chesky is a great example where he applied his design sort of onto sort of the business structure of an organization, of a highly successful, scalable, robust, dynamic organization that was able to get a 50 to 60% hit, if not more, during COVID and still have a thriving business. And then like years later, actually be much better off, right? It's like, how do you design an organization that's resilient enough to take on risks like that? And how do you create an organization where you leverage sort of storytelling in your product design process in a way where meetings are like easily understandable, engageable, and dynamic, and like you follow sort of like a user's journey, and you're able to sort of much more dynamically collaborate on all levels of the product, right? It's a technology first company that you're not just sort of like shoved productizing or digitizing some old thing, but that it's like from the ground up, it's built that way, and it's built really well. And it's designed, I think, because it's designed by a designer. And so designers get this business point of view. And so that's a really important thing for designers. And then you get the benefits of that product sort of orientation. And the problem with big companies, especially monopolies, which pretty much most of the tech companies are some form of a monopoly, whether it's Google and search. And the company is a monopoly when they're telling you they're not a monopoly. They just go a category up. If they're a search ad company, they say, oh no, we're a technology company because we make like hardware and we do this and that. It's okay. And if a company's saying we are a monopoly, it's usually a sign they're not a monopoly at all. And so everyone's trying to pretend to be something that they're not. Obviously, it's a bad look. And yeah.
I love the example they brought up of Edison and Tesla, right? Nikola Tesla. We're talking about the person that inspired Elon's company. Is a great example of, okay, who do you feel should be rich? It's not merit. It's who owns the thing. If you have equity in something and it becomes valuable, that's how you get rich. And so Edison chose to work on the business. Tesla worked in the business.
That's right.
And so when you work in the business, you're on payroll. And so you can get very comfortably wealthy doing that. Doing what Tesla did, where you just work for Netflix for a few years and make $500K a year. And you just, and honestly, to comfortably retire, you just need $4 million net worth. That's the number. That's it. That's all you need. That's enough. That's what enough looks like. And you could do that by working in the business.
It's like simple investing. Yeah. Long term. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you want to be like, have the complete flexibility to like live life to your interests, it's like the easiest path is to work on a business, not in it.
Yeah.
And that's what Edison did. He built the business and he hired the right people, and he deserves to cash out. So even if he was an asshole, it's the way it is. Yeah. Yeah, it worked. And Brian,
have you read the E-Myth? It's exactly that. It's people
I'm a great doctor. Therefore, I could do my own doctor practice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. A good example in the book is you like baking. And so you open a little cupcake shop. And then you lose the love of making cupcakes and your business fails. And it's because you're trying to do the thing, or you're trying to fire your boss, as opposed to actually like running something is so much more responsibility, but you need to create systems. Like you need to get yourself out of those tasks and jobs. So if you love that job, like you're passionate about some specific job, starting a business is not the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Sharif, this has been an awesome discussion, and I thank you for being willing to talk about the philosophy behind work. This was supposed to be like a discussion about remote, but then we just kind of talked about, oh, no, remote, in person, that's not the problem. It's how you actually operate as a business and if it aligns with your values. And I think that's an incredible insight. We're talking about the wrong problem in the zeitgeist. Worry more about, hey, what do you care about? What do you value? What worthy causes do you care about? And just align your career around that. It's possible. And just develop the relationships that get you there. And you'll live a very fulfilling life. So Sharif, thank you so much for coming on the show.
That's exactly right. And that's most of what I do now is at an agency, we long-term strategically partner with companies. And we literally just say, okay, this thing that you came to us with wanting to solve, that's not what we need to solve, right? We need to look at this and this, and we need to research and understand this and this, right? And it's questioning things. It's modeling healthy conflict. It's introducing challenging questions that sort of push things forward. And so that's largely what we're doing at the agency is we just partner with businesses and especially leadership and try and make the lives better for everyone at the company, but also the products and services that they're delivering.
Yeah. Sharif, thank you so much for coming on the show. I guess we'll have to do part 2 sometime.
We have to.
Yeah.
And either you have to come to Amsterdam or I'm going to
part of the tour. I'd love it.
Yeah.
I'd love an excuse to write off a trip to Amsterdam. That sounds nice. Thank you so much. Let's talk soon, and you have a good one.
You too. Take care. Really appreciate it.